Well, that's a really interesting question, this idea of zeros in the 100-point scale. Notice it's not just zeros. It's zeros on the 100-point scale. Because zeros on the 4.0 scale, 3.0, check, check, minus, and zero, those are all fine. Because that zero has an equal influence on all the other numbers if you were to mathematically calculate the grade in some massive aggregate. And that's an issue right there we'll get to in just a moment. But this idea of zeros on the 100-point scale is one of the most controversial issues everywhere I go. And it's born out of this idea of using the 100-point scale as a way to measure and report human progress against a goal with great specificity. It was never meant to do that. It's a bit of a corruption to do that. So let's take a look at some of the reasoning behind not doing it step by step. First, consider, it doesn't matter where you set the line for what each letter grade is. Some school districts, an A is 95 to 100, sometimes it's 94, sometimes 93, sometimes it's 90, and sometimes it's 80 to 100. A B is 60 to 79, a C is 40 to 59, a D is 20 to 39, and an F is 19 to 0. Well, they're trying to show that's a 4.0 scale with 20 level increments for each one of the 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Trying to equate 4.0 to 100.0 should teachers need that translation. It's what the community will tolerate. There's not like a set of research data that says an A should be this or a B should be that. Okay, so now the teacher's deciding, I've got this massive F range. Often that's 59 to 0 or 60 to 0 or 65, something like that. Just for the sake of example, we'll say that that's 60 to 0. Okay, so a D would be, the lowest D would be a 51 in that case. Or excuse me, a 61. So now we're thinking, do I give the lowest, most hurtful, and unrecoverable end of the F range, or do I give the most recoverable end of the F range with lots of hope, but nevertheless still an F? We begin to think, do I need degrees or gradations of F-titude? You're a tiny F, you're a large gigantor F. You don't need to do that. Once you're into that F zone, you're in the zone of not there yet. Or no evidence of learning, good reason or bad reason, moral, immoral, it doesn't matter. You have not demonstrated evidence. So in some high schools, there might be no Carnegie unit, no credit given. But whatever it is, good reason or bad, no credit's given. Okay. Well, I have to also teach and grade in such a way as to engender hope. If a kid wants to throw in the ball and go home, I can't teach him because he's divested from my classroom. If a kid gets 1-0, it takes a mammoth pile of perfect 100s just to creep up to the D zone, which falsifies a grade, but also is so overwhelming to most students who are really humans in the morphing that why try? It's just, it's insurmountable to me, and I've got to keep my kids vested. So if I'm trying to decide between a 0 and a 59 or a 60, I'm going to decide on the most hopeful end, but nevertheless an accurate report. This kid has not shown evidence of his learning. An F is an F is an F. I don't need to decide whether it's a gigantic F or a small f because I'm going to respond the same way. Investigate and take corrective action. Now you might be thinking some of those students will brag. Man, I did nothing at all. I blew it off. You all worked so hard. But me, who did nothing, I still got a 60. Yeah. What's that kid really saying? I did nothing at all. You guys worked hard, but I did nothing, and I still failed. Ooh, that doesn't sound so good. The students are the first ones to realize how absurd this all is, and they don't think they're getting something for having done nothing. That's not even close to the truth. All we're doing is mitigating this extraordinary negative impact. Think about this. What if we gave the A the same influence as we give F's today? 60 to 0? Well, the A is now 60 points. 100 down to 40 is the A range. Well, it'll be actually physically hard to get anything less than straight A's. You would never allow such an outlier of an A to have such a skewing upward influence. You should find it just as absurd to find an F having such a skewing lower influence. We wouldn't do that. If a kid got in the teens, he got a 15 out of 100, and an 18 out of 100, and one glorious moment of clarity, he got a 98. Mathematically, they would skew him up into the passing range, but you would never tolerate that. That's an idea that Doug Reeves talks about in his writings, and it's worth thinking about. Well, consider this. The grading scale in a lot of places is 190, 80, 70, 60. That's a 4.0 scale, 4, 3, 2, 1. A 2.0, well, basic ratios and proportions that third graders understand, that would be an 80. A 70 would be a 1. 60 on a 100-point scale would be about a 0 on a 4.0 scale. Well, people misapply work ethics. They think, all right, it's a 100-point scale we just did. I'm not going to give you a 60. I'm going to give you nothingness, which is a 0. How many levels is a 0 below failure? Well, it's 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. That's 6 levels below failure. It's not failure, it's 6 levels below. That's the exact same thing as saying on a 4.0 scale, child doesn't do anything, there's no evidence of learning. Instead of giving him a 0, which would be legitimate, because he has no evidence, he has no credit for doing or learning anything, well, I'm going to give him a -6. In other words, he has to climb 6 levels up just to get even with absolute failure. This is insanity. But wait, it gets worse. Think about this, and I actually heard this from a school board member in Norfolk, Virginia. Think about this. We do the temperature readings for 5 days in June. Now, in Norfolk, Virginia, it's very hot and humid, and we use Fahrenheit. So those of you who do Celsius, you'd have to make the translations. But basically, if we did like 87 one day, 88 another, 84 another, 85 another, oh, Friday, my bad, I totally forgot to take the temperature. So it's a 0. Well, mathematically calculate that all up, and it's 68.8 degrees. Is 68.8 degrees accurate for the weather in Norfolk, Virginia in a hot week in June? Not even close. And grades have to be accurate. You can't mess this up by having a distorted scale that was never used to report, or meant to be used, to report human progress. You're going to have to change the scale so that the 0, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4, they have equal influence on all the others. But you know what? This is not a big problem, is it? If we disaggregate. What if I had a kid who did nothing or did less than nothing? He got a 47. He got a 0, whatever it was. So I appointed it as a 60. So he gets 60, 60, 60. And in one, again, glorious moment of clarity, he gets 100. Yeah! And then 60, 60. If you average that all together, he could actually pass. Nothingness, nothingness, no evidence, no evidence, no evidence, lots of evidence, no evidence, no evidence. He could technically pass, but that's only if you average. One of the things we've learned in differentiated classrooms and in standards-based grading is we no longer use mean or averaging. We use central tendency, the most consistent level of performance over time. And it turns out that has a much higher correlation with any kind of testing that will be done on that student outside of your classroom. So if you really want to have integrity in your grades, they mean something, and you don't want to falsify the report of what a kid knows, you'll want to disaggregate. In this standard, there's no evidence. In this standard, there's evidence. That's criterion referenced. And it no longer becomes an issue, 0s on the 100-point scale, if you stop doing the averaging and actually increase the accuracy, the truth, and the usefulness of your letter grades.